Do you remember the dinners only poor families could afford in the 1970s? For many African Americans, those simple meals were what kept them going. How did food made from so little carry so much strength? Fried bologna and onions was the kind of meal that reminded people that flavor could come from almost nothing. A single slice of bologna, fried until the edges curled like a flower, filled the whole kitchen with that familiar salty smell. It sizzled in the old pan beside thin slices of onion that softened and turned golden, sweetening as they cooked. Some people laid it on white bread, others on biscuits, and a few ate it plain with mustard. It was the taste of a long day's work, the hum of conversation, and laughter over chipped plates. The bologna might have been cheap, but the pride behind that frying pan was not. Families made this after the paycheck ran out, after rent was paid, when the fridge was nearly empty but spirits stayed high. It was food for the tired, the hopeful, and the proud, people who refused to let hunger take away their joy. Kids grew up thinking the smell of frying bologna meant love, because in a way, it did. That sizzling sound meant dinner was ready, no matter how little there was to cook. Pig's feet stew was one of those meals that made a house smell alive. The pot simmered for hours, slow and steady, turning tough meat into something soft enough to fall from the bone. With onions, garlic, and a few sprigs of greens, the broth thickened into something hearty enough to stretch across 2 or 3 nights. No one wasted anything, not even the bones, because that stew carried everything a family could afford, and sometimes more. It was made on Sundays, or when the weather turned cold, the kind of dish that drew neighbors to the porch asking what was cooking. The feet themselves were cheap, sold in bundles for less than $1, but the patience to make them tender took skill. This was food for people who had more time than money and more faith than both. The slow bubbling, the steam on the window, and the laughter that followed each bowl told the story of survival done with grace. Cabbage and smoked neck bones filled the air with a smoky sweetness that said dinner was near. Every Southern kitchen knew that smell, the kind that wrapped itself around the walls and made people hungry just walking by. The cabbage boiled down soft, soaking up every bit of salt and smoke from the neck bones. It was simple food that turned into a feast when paired with cornbread or rice. In the 1970s, this was survival cooking at its finest. One pot, one stove, one meal to feed a whole family. You did not need much money, just time and patience. The meat was cheap, but the taste felt like Sunday. It was humble, honest food that brought people together. Kids would hover over the pot, waiting for that moment when the lid lifted and the steam hit the air. The dish carried more than flavor. It carried memory, the kind that sticks to your ribs and your heart. Pinto beans and rice was the meal that never failed to show up when times were tight. It was dependable, like the neighbor who always waved or the church that never closed its doors. Pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered slow with onions, garlic, and a bit of salt pork if you had it. Rice stretched it further, making one pot feed everyone at the table. The taste was earthy, hearty, and full of quiet strength. No one went hungry when there were beans on the stove. They were the rhythm of the week, the comfort of something warm after a long shift, the proof that cheap did not mean empty. Every spoonful carried history, from southern farms to city apartments, reminding folks that food can be both humble and holy. It was nourishment for the soul as much as the body, and it made even the poorest dinner feel like home. Ramen noodles with hot sauce and eggs might sound simple, but for many families in the 1970s, it was a miracle in a bowl. A few packs could feed everyone, and all it needed was water, fire, and imagination. The noodles curled in the pot, soaking up every bit of spice and salt, while the eggs dropped in and turned silky. Hot sauce gave it life, that fiery bite that cut through the sameness of struggle. It was quick, cheap, and hot, a meal that tasted like satisfaction. The whole house smelled faintly of pepper and pride. People called it poor folks' comfort food, but it was clever too, proof that creativity beats money any day. When you had nothing but still made something good, you learned to see joy in the smallest things. That bowl was proof that flavor, like hope, could always be stretched. Chicken backs and rice showed how far a single bird could go. The backs were the cheapest part, sold in big bags that nobody else wanted, but they held flavor like nothing else. Boiled slow, the broth turned golden, thick with the taste of chicken and onion. Rice soaked it all up, and soon the pot was full enough to feed everyone. The dish was born from necessity, but became tradition. It was not fancy, but it was honest. The kind of meal where mothers seasoned with instinct and love instead of measuring spoons. The bones were picked clean, the bowls wiped dry, and the family left full. This was the art of survival turned into something sacred. Every bite was a reminder that waste was a luxury no one could afford, and gratitude made everything taste better. Fried cornmeal mush was a meal that stuck to your ribs and your memories. Made from cornmeal, water, and salt, it was poured into a pan, cooled, then fried into golden slabs that crisped on the outside and stayed soft in the middle. It was a Depression-era recipe that refused to die, a cheap staple that carried over into the 1970s because it worked. Kids ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sometimes with syrup, sometimes plain. The sound of it sizzling in a skillet was the soundtrack of 1,000 kitchens. It was food that made do without apology. In a world that measured worth by what you had, fried cornmeal mush was the quiet reminder that even the simplest meal could feel rich. People learned that comfort came from creativity, not cost. Gizzards and gravy over rice was a dish that took patience, not money. Gizzards were the kind of meat most folks overlooked, tough and chewy unless cooked just right. But when simmered for hours in seasoned broth, they softened into something delicious. The gravy was thick, poured hot over rice that caught every drop. It was soul food in the truest sense, made from scraps and turned into satisfaction. Every kitchen had its secret way of making it right, from adding peppers to browning the flour just so. You did not need fine ingredients, only faith that it would come together. The smell alone made neighbors knock, asking for a taste. It was a poor man's delicacy and a proud cook's triumph. Collard greens with fatback was the smell of home in the Deep South. The greens simmered for hours, the fatback melting down and flavoring the pot with smoky salt. Steam rolled through the kitchen while the Potlikker turned rich and dark, full of vitamins and stories. Families ladled it over cornbread, wiping bowls clean. This dish was more than food. It was ceremony, a way of honoring the past while surviving the present. In the 1970s, it carried the same meaning it always had: resilience. Even when money was thin, collards on the stove meant everything would be all right. The greens were humble, but they represented everything enduring and good. Canned sardines with crackers and mustard were the no-cook meal that kept hunger away when the stove stayed cold. It was the supper of night shifts, factory breaks, and long days that never seemed to end. You peeled back the tin, spread the fish on saltines, added a dab of mustard, and called it dinner. It was sharp, salty, and strangely comforting. People who ate this did not care about appearances. They cared about surviving another day. The tang of mustard, the crunch of crackers, the oil of the sardines. It all came together in quiet satisfaction. It was the food of those who refused to quit. In a world that gave them little, they made do with what they had and made it taste like perseverance. Liver and onions was the kind of meal that tested your resolve before rewarding your patience. The smell filled the kitchen long before dinner was ready, and not everyone liked it. But when money was tight, taste had to take a back seat to nourishment. Thin slices of liver, dredged in flour, hit the pan with a sharp hiss, followed by the sweet perfume of onions caramelizing low and slow. It was a dish packed with iron, one that kept workers strong through long days. Mothers would tell their children, "Eat up, it will put strength in your bones." And they meant it. It was not a luxury meal, but it was medicine in disguise. The bitterness faded as the onions sweetened, turning hardship into something almost pleasant. By the end, plates were wiped clean because waste was not an option. This was food that reminded families that survival always came first, and pride could taste better than comfort. The frying pan became a teacher of patience, sizzling with rhythm and purpose. Families learned that love sometimes wore the scent of onions and the taste of endurance. Even those who disliked liver remembered the care behind it. The scraping of the skillet, the quiet stirring, the sigh of a mother watching her family eat. It was a meal that told a story of strength in silence, proving that even bitter food could leave behind a sweet memory. Fried cabbage and potatoes was the smell of thrift and warmth rolled into one. The sizzle of sliced potatoes hitting the skillet mingled with the sound of cabbage crackling as it softened. It was a poor man's stir-fry, made with nothing fancy but full of flavor. Sometimes bacon grease or a strip of fatback turned the whole thing smoky, rich, and satisfying. The meal came together fast, just a handful of ingredients, but it fed everyone around the table. Children knew this dinner meant it was almost payday, when everything left in the pantry came together for one last meal. It was humble food, but every bite was seasoned with care. What made it special was not what it cost, but the way it could make a home feel full again, even when the shelves were bare. The pan clattered, the scent rose, and people gathered close without being called. The potatoes browned to perfection, the cabbage wilted into silk, and suddenly poverty felt far away. The laughter that filled the room tasted better than any feast. Fried cabbage and potatoes might not have been much to look at, but it carried dignity in every bite. It turned scraps into satisfaction and made sure no one went to bed hungry. Black-eyed peas with rice, known as Hoppin' John in many homes, was a southern meal that carried hope with every serving. It was said to bring good luck, but in truth it brought sustenance and comfort when there was little else to go around. The peas simmered slow with bits of onion, garlic, and maybe a scrap of ham bone if one could be spared. When spooned over rice, it became a full meal, soft, creamy, and full of quiet strength. It was one of those dinners that needed no introduction because it always arrived at the right time. In the 1970s, families who had little still found joy in it, believing that a good pot of peas could chase away bad fortune. That kind of faith turned poverty into pride. The aroma was enough to lift spirits, drifting through screen doors and down front porches. Even the pot itself told stories, passed from grandmother to mother, always filled with the same promise: luck, love, and full bellies. Some swore by eating it on New Year's Day, others made it whenever life felt uncertain. Either way, it reminded folks that good fortune could be cooked right on the stove, one slow stir at a time. For many, the dish became a ritual of renewal, the kind that turned one meal into a memory that never faded. Children who grew up on it would make it for their own families years later, repeating every step the same way their mothers did. The simple act of stirring a pot became a connection to generations past, a quiet thank you to those who survived on faith and beans. Turkey necks and gravy were the kind of meal that started from scraps and ended like a feast. Bought cheap at the butcher, these bony cuts looked like nothing special, but a few hours in a pot proved otherwise. The meat fell from the bone, tender and rich, and the broth turned silky with flavor. A roux turned it into thick gravy poured over rice or mashed potatoes, stretching the meal to fill every plate. The scent of it cooking could make a house feel alive again. This was not just dinner, it was survival served with soul. The lesson was simple. With time and patience, even the cheapest meat could turn into a meal worth remembering. The bubbling pot filled the air with warmth, calling everyone home before the sun went down. Kids would peek in the kitchen, eyes wide, waiting for the first ladleful. When the meal was finally served, it felt like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday night. Every bite was tender, heavy with flavor, and lighter on the wallet than anyone could believe. It was proof that comfort did not need wealth. It only needed care. Hot water cornbread with beans was a meal made from ingenuity and routine. When the oven was too expensive to use and flour too hard to find, folks made do on the stovetop. Cornmeal, boiling water, and salt were all it took to fry golden rounds that sizzled crisp around the edges. Served beside a pot of seasoned beans, it became dinner good enough to forget hard times for a little while. It was soft inside, crunchy outside, and perfect for soaking up every drop of bean broth. That combination filled stomachs and lifted spirits, proof that poverty never stood a chance against a skilled cook with a hot pan. The sound of the cornbread frying was like music, sharp, rhythmic, and alive. Children watched as their mothers flipped each piece, timing it by instinct. Sometimes a little sugar was added, sometimes a sprinkle of pepper, but the result was always the same. Simple joy on a plate. Even when cupboards looked bare, a bag of cornmeal could turn a kitchen into a place of plenty. It was survival disguised as comfort, the kind of meal that told the world that love could still taste golden and crisp. Macaroni with evaporated milk was the humble cousin of mac and cheese, made without luxury but with all the heart. Families mixed boiled pasta with a can of milk, a pinch of salt, and maybe a bit of butter if they could spare it. It thickened into a creamy dish that looked rich even when it was not. Some stirred in black pepper or dried herbs to make it special. It was a dish made to stretch, to fill bellies without breaking budgets. Children never cared that it lacked real cheese. To them, it was just good. For parents, it was a reminder that love could turn even a bare pantry into something that tasted like comfort. In small kitchens, mothers stirred the pot with quiet pride, knowing they were making something that would last until payday. The smell was gentle but comforting, warm like a promise that hunger would have to wait. The sound of spoons clinking in metal bowls was its own kind of music. Families gathered close, sharing laughter over a meal that cost next to nothing but meant everything. It was proof that simplicity could still taste like home, that love could flavor even the plainest food. Rice and tomato stew was what happened when creativity met scarcity. Canned tomatoes were cheap, rice was filling, and together they made something magical. The pot bubbled with tangy sweetness and the aroma of onions, garlic, and pepper. Some added a dash of sugar, others hot sauce or greens, but the heart of the dish stayed the same, simple, affordable, and satisfying. It was dinner for anyone who needed a reminder that warmth could come from the simplest ingredients. Each spoonful told a story of resourcefulness, of families who knew how to make flavor out of struggle. The red sauce clung to the grains, thick enough to feed a table full of hungry mouths. It was a dish that taught patience and gratitude, stirring slowly as the day wound down. Kids waited by the stove, drawn by the smell of tomatoes and home. Even when money was low, that pot brought people together. Every bite carried comfort, a reminder that even the poorest table could still hold pride. Fried chicken livers were the brave man's dinner, rich and strong in taste. They were cheap, sold in bulk, and packed with nutrients that families needed. Dipped in flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, and fried until crisp, they were crunchy outside and tender inside. The smell alone filled a kitchen with a sense of abundance, even when money was scarce. Some ate them with rice, others with bread, and always with pride. They were a reminder that flavor and dignity could be found in the most overlooked places. In small kitchens across the South, they sizzled in hot oil while families talked about their day, each sound of frying echoing like a heartbeat. The taste was bold, earthy, and unmistakably homegrown. Children wrinkled their noses at first, but always came around after the first bite. It was food that made you grateful for what you had and proud of what you could create. Homemade pinto bean soup was a meal that proved patience was a cook's greatest wealth. Beans soaked overnight and simmered all day, filling the house with warmth and the scent of promise. Onions, salt, and a bit of leftover fat were enough to make it rich. It stretched far, one pot for dinner, the rest reheated for lunch. A family could live off it for days, spooning out bowls that tasted better each time. It was more than soup. It was a rhythm of survival, where every meal meant another day endured. Families learned to trust the slow simmer, to let time do the work that money could not. The bubbling pot told its own story, one of endurance and quiet pride. Sometimes there would be cornbread on the side, sometimes just a spoon and faith. It fed bodies and spirits alike, reminding everyone that a little patience could turn almost nothing into something beautiful. Cornbread and buttermilk was the simplest supper there was, but it carried the most meaning. On hot southern nights, folks would crumble leftover cornbread into a glass or bowl, pour cold buttermilk over it, and eat it with a spoon. No stove, no fuss, just comfort. It was cooling, filling, and deeply tied to home. This dish was about making do with what was left, turning yesterday's bread into tonight's meal. It was humble, but it was also history. A reminder that even in hardship, people found ways to sit down and share a moment of peace. The tang of the buttermilk mixed with the sweetness of the cornbread, creating a flavor that was both sharp and soothing. Old folks swore it could fix almost anything: a tired body, a hungry stomach, or a heavy heart. It was the taste of endurance and gratitude, simple as it was sacred. Boiled potatoes with canned meat was the kind of dinner that taught people how to survive on imagination alone. It did not matter whether the can said Spam, Vienna sausages, or potted meat, whatever was on sale or left on the shelf was enough. Potatoes were boiled soft until they nearly fell apart, then mashed together with slices of salty meat that glistened in the pan. The smell was simple but comforting, a mix of salt and starch that spoke of home. The dish filled bellies fast, which was all that mattered when money was low and appetites were big. Some added onions or a bit of grease to give it life. Others poured the leftover liquid from the can into the pot for flavor. Every version was different, but every version told the same story, making the best out of the least. Families gathered around chipped plates, grateful for something warm after a long day. The sizzle of meat hitting the pan was a small victory against hunger. Children did not care where it came from. It was dinner, it was hot, and it was theirs. Those canned goods were the quiet heroes of the kitchen, turning a bare pantry into a meal that tasted like endurance. Poverty might have taken choices, but it never took pride, and nothing proved that better than a pot of boiled potatoes and canned meat cooked with heart. Canned greens with salt pork were a lesson in turning dull into delicious. The greens came from tins stacked on grocery shelves, limp and pale until they met the pan. But when cooked low and slow with a piece of salt pork, they came alive again, rich with smoke and soul. The smell filled the house long before the meal was ready, earthy and familiar, like Sunday cooking on a weekday. A pot of greens was never just food. It was memory, family, and tradition simmering together. Even in the 1970s, when canned vegetables were cheap and fresh produce was hard to come by, people knew how to make them taste like something special. The salt pork melted down into flavor, wrapping every leaf in warmth. You did not need fancy spices, just time and patience. It was the kind of meal that made neighbors knock on the door, asking what was cooking. Served with cornbread or rice, it could feed a family and still leave leftovers for tomorrow. It reminded people that nothing from the garden or the pig ever went to waste. Poor folks knew how to season survival with skill, turning plain food into something that fed more than hunger. It fed the spirit, too. Okra and tomato stirrup was one of those dishes that started as a side and ended up stealing the whole show. Fresh or canned tomatoes met sliced okra in a single skillet, cooking down together until they became soft, sticky, and full of flavor. The texture was thick and rich, the kind that clung to every spoonful of rice or cornbread. The smell was tangy and green, sharp at first, but mellowing into something soothing. It was food that reminded families of southern summers and hard work in the fields. Even those who swore they did not like okra found themselves asking for seconds. The trick was to cook it slow, letting the tomatoes do their work until everything melted together into a perfect mess of goodness. A bit of onion or bell pepper made it shine, and sometimes a pinch of sugar brought out the sweetness. In neighborhoods where fresh produce was scarce, a can of tomatoes and a bag of frozen okra could still taste like a garden feast. It was humble food, yes, but it had heart, and every stir of the spoon carried the sound of love being cooked into survival. Fried hot dogs and rice were the clever man's version of sausage and grains, a dish born straight from necessity. One pack of hot dogs could stretch across 3 or 4 dinners if you sliced them right. Fried in a skillet until golden and crisp at the edges, The pieces were tossed into fluffy white rice seasoned with whatever was around: salt, pepper, maybe a touch of hot sauce. The sound of the skillet was quick and cheerful, the kind of noise that made a small kitchen feel like a celebration. It was cheap, filling, and came together in minutes after long workdays. Kids loved it because it looked fun, and parents loved it because it filled everyone without breaking the budget. Leftovers were rare because no one ever left a bite behind. It was proof that even the simplest food could still feel like comfort. Fried hot dogs and rice may not have been fancy, but in its sizzling, smoky way, it gave families a taste of joy on the hardest nights. Cracklin' cornbread was what happened when thrift met tradition. Every Southern cook knew the rule: waste nothing from the hog. The leftover bits of fat and skin, called cracklins, were chopped small and stirred into cornbread batter, giving each slice a salty crunch. The smell of it baking filled the house with warmth, the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. It came out golden, crispy at the edges, and soft in the middle, with little bursts of pork flavor in every bite. Served with beans, greens, or just a drizzle of syrup, it turned scraps into something worth celebrating. The sound of cracklins popping in the skillet was as familiar as laughter after supper. It was proof that even leftovers could taste rich when cooked with care. In homes where money was scarce but love was not, cracklin' cornbread was a symbol of pride, the kind of meal that made folks close their eyes and hum between bites. Stewed chicken necks with dumplings were the kind of meal that reminded people what patience could create. Chicken necks were the cheapest part of the bird, often tossed aside, but families who knew better saw their worth. Simmered long and slow, the necks gave up every drop of flavor to the broth, turning it thick and savory. Dumplings made from flour and water floated on top, soaking in the rich juices until they puffed up soft and tender. It was poor man's comfort food, cooked with time instead of money. The aroma filled the home, drawing everyone to the table. Each bite was a lesson in gratitude, how something once overlooked could become a treasure. Kids loved pulling at the soft dough, dipping it into the golden broth, licking their fingers clean. It was a dish built on love and patience, two things that cost nothing but made everything taste better. Mothers often stood over the pot, stirring gently as if coaxing comfort out of thin air. Steam fogged up the windows, and neighbors passing by could smell that supper was close. It was the kind of food that filled both stomachs and hearts, reminding everyone that joy did not need money. It just needed warmth, care, and a little time. Sweet potatoes and white bread supper was simple, sweet, and sacred in its own way. When sugar was scarce, this pairing filled the gap between dinner and dessert. Sweet potatoes were roasted or boiled until soft and mashed, then spread across slices of white bread still warm from the toaster. Sometimes a bit of butter or syrup was added, if luck or paychecks allowed. The flavor was rich but humble, sweet enough to satisfy and hearty enough to last through the night. It was the kind of meal that carried memories of holidays and home, even on the hardest days. Families sat around small tables, sharing what little they had, and somehow it always felt like plenty. It was a quiet joy, born from making sweetness out of struggle, a reminder that love could turn even two simple foods into comfort. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes would drift through the house, thick and warm like a promise. Some ate it slowly, savoring every bite, while others devoured it like it was cake. There was no shame in it, just satisfaction. That humble meal was more than food. It was proof that something as ordinary as a potato and bread could taste like care, and sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. Cabbage and egg stir-fry was a one-pan wonder for people who knew how to stretch every bit of food. A single head of cabbage, shredded thin, cooked down soft with a couple of beaten eggs cracked right into the pan. Salt, pepper, and maybe a splash of hot sauce were all the flavor it needed. It was light but filling, fast but homemade. The sizzling sound filled kitchens across small southern towns, a song of thrift and resourcefulness. Some added leftover rice to make it go farther, turning it into a full meal. Others ate it with cornbread and called it supper. Cabbage and egg stir-fry was not just quick, it was clever. It showed that skill, not money, made good cooking. Even now, old-timers remember the smell of it frying and the pride that came with knowing you could feed your family with almost nothing. It was the kind of recipe that was never written down, passed instead through memory and repetition. Mothers taught daughters the timing, the turning, the feel of the pan. The taste was simple, but it stuck with you, reminding everyone who ate it that survival could be beautiful when cooked with heart. Canned mackerel croquettes were the ocean's answer to tight budgets. A can of mackerel, a handful of breadcrumbs, and some chopped onion turned into golden patties fried crisp in a pan. They were fish cakes for people who could not afford fresh catch but still wanted flavor and protein. The smell of frying mackerel filled the kitchen, sharp but familiar, the kind of scent that let the whole block know supper was on. Served with rice or white bread, they made a complete meal. Leftovers were rare, but when they happened, they were tucked into sandwiches for lunch the next day. It was humble food, but with every crunch came a sense of pride. Poor families made it work, turning canned fish into something that tasted like success. It was not about luxury, it was about love and knowing how to make a dollar stretch as far as a meal could go. The sizzling oil, the golden crust, the careful flip of the spatula, it all felt like ceremony. Kids stood by, waiting for their turn, eyes following every move. Even when times were rough, the sound of frying croquettes promised that life could still taste good. Navy beans and ham hocks were the definition of patience and payoff. The beans soaked overnight, swelling with water and promise before being simmered for hours with a smoky ham hock dropped right in the middle. The smell alone could make a neighbor wander over just to talk. It was food for the body and balm for the soul. Every bite was soft, savory, and rich with history. In small towns, pots of navy beans were shared between families, ladled out with cornbread on the side. The longer it cooked, the better it got. Deep, hearty, and comforting. No matter how tough life was, this dish brought people together. It turned hardship into hospitality, proving that even a pot of beans could taste like home. In every spoonful was a story of strength, survival, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow would be just a little better. The sound of bubbling beans on the stove was steady and sure, like a heartbeat for the whole house. The ham hock released its smoky flavor slowly, transforming plain beans into something extraordinary. By the time supper was ready, the air was heavy with warmth and peace. Everyone ate until they were full, grateful for food that tasted like love itself. Hoppin' John was more than food. It was a wish whispered into every new year and a memory of old fields and family prayers. Made from black-eyed peas, rice, and a scrap of salted pork, it carried a meaning far greater than its humble parts. Each bowl symbolized luck, wealth, and resilience, a quiet hope for better days ahead. Born on plantations where ingredients were scarce, Hoppin' John turned survival into tradition. The peas represented coins, the rice abundance, and the pork, the flavor of prosperity. It became a holiday staple across generations, cooked in cast-iron pots and served with greens on the side. The slow simmer filled homes with comfort, while the taste spoke of endurance. People didn't just eat Hoppin' John, they believed in it. It was a way to honor ancestors who worked the land and still found joy in sharing a simple meal. Every spoonful connected past to present, hardship to hope. In the rhythm of the South, Hoppin' John remains a dish that keeps faith alive, proving that luck can be cooked, shared, and passed down like love itself. Turnip and potato hash was a skillet meal that worked wonders when meat was scarce or simply unavailable. Families would dice turnips and potatoes, fry them together in drippings or lard, and season them with onions, salt, and pepper. The combination produced a dish that was both hearty and inexpensive, making it a frequent breakfast or supper in households trying to stretch limited supplies. Turnips were especially important because they were cheap, easy to grow, and available in gardens or local markets. Blended with potatoes, they created bulk without requiring meat to make a plate feel substantial. This hash was also flexible, with families adding whatever scraps of vegetables they had on hand to improve flavor. Though simple, it offered warmth and familiarity to those who often faced uncertainty at mealtime. Turnip and potato hash might not have been glamorous, but it carried families through tough years and gave comfort with every bite. Wild grape connected plantation kitchens to the native abundance of the American South. Muscadine and scuppernong grapes grew untended along fences and forest edges, providing a dependable late summer harvest. Enslaved workers gathered the clusters and crushed them by hand to create a tangy juice that could be fermented slightly for a refreshing drink or boiled into a syrupy must used to season grains and greens. This technique echoed West African traditions of using fruit reductions to brighten savory dishes. After emancipation, muscadine wine and homemade grape jellies became hallmarks of Southern foodways, and small farms still produce them today. The careful gathering and slow simmering required patience and skill, qualities that defined the cooking of those who made the most of every wild resource. Wild grape stands as both a practical recipe and a testament to how African American cooks merged Old World techniques with New World ingredients, leaving a flavor that continues to shape regional preserves and beverages across the Carolinas and Georgia. Cowpea and collard stew combined two powerhouse ingredients that sustained countless families through hard times. Field peas, also known as cowpeas, were simmered slowly with smoky meat and joined by hearty collard greens, creating a dish rich in protein, vitamins, and earthy flavor. The long cooking process filled homes with an aroma that signaled comfort and nourishment. Farmers valued cowpeas for their ability to thrive in poor soil, while collards offered leaves long after other vegetables had withered. Together, they made a meal that cost little but fed many, reflecting a tradition of resourcefulness and care. Mothers and grandmothers seasoned the pot with onions, garlic, and pepper, each adding a personal touch passed down through generations. Families gathered around the table with slices of cornbread to soak up the flavorful broth, finding strength in every spoonful. Though supermarkets now offer endless choices, the slow-simmered union of cowpeas and collards stands as a reminder of a time when simple ingredients created enduring nourishment. Homemade cornmeal pancakes for supper were another way families stretched basic ingredients into a filling meal. Flour, cornmeal, lard, and milk came together in a batter that fried into golden cakes on a hot skillet. My grandmother served them stacked, drizzled with syrup if any was available, or eaten plain with butter when syrup was gone. The pancakes were fluffy yet hearty, giving enough energy to hold a family until morning. They cost next to nothing but fed many, which was exactly what mattered most. Children loved the sweetness when syrup was added, while adults appreciated the sheer substance of the cakes. In the 1960s, cornmeal pancakes were a staple when meat was scarce, turning humble ingredients into something warm and reliable. It was comfort food born of necessity, one of those meals that never left memory even as times changed. Homemade cornmeal pancakes carried the spirit of thrift, filling plates with love and survival. Okra and tomato stew was a dish where heritage met hunger and turned it into comfort. Born from African roots and southern soil, it blended the earthiness of okra with the tang of ripe tomatoes in a thick, bubbling pot. The slime that many feared became silk under the right hands, thickening the stew into a rich, flavorful broth. Onions, garlic, and a few peppers added depth, while a dash of salt or cayenne made the flavors sing. Families often served it over rice or ate it plain with a piece of cornbread, wiping the last drops from their plates. This dish wasn't just food. It was identity, a reflection of generations who made do and made magic. It connected farm to family, past to present, and hunger to heart. The smell alone carried memories of warm kitchens and laughter that refused to fade. Okra and tomato stew was a promise that no ingredient was too humble to become beautiful. It was the taste of tradition kept alive, no matter the hardship, and a reminder that every simmering pot held more than flavor. It held history. Stewed okra and tomatoes were the kind of dish that took simple garden produce and turned it into something nourishing enough to feed a family. Okra, a vegetable with African origins, thrived in southern soil, while tomatoes grew easily in backyard gardens. Together, simmered slowly with onions, spices, and sometimes a scrap of salt pork, they created a stew that was tangy, savory, and thick. Families relied on it because it stretched small harvests into larger meals, often served over rice or with cornbread to make it filling. The dish was especially important when meat was too expensive to buy, as it added depth and nutrition without needing animal protein. Stewed okra and tomatoes became more than food. They were a way to survive with what the land provided. For many, the taste carried reminders of summer gardens and the hard work it took to keep families fed. It was frugal, delicious, and a perfect example of survival cooking. Wild persimmon leather served as a natural energy bar long before packaged snacks existed. Fully ripe wild persimmons, soft and honey-sweet, were mashed into a smooth pulp and spread thinly on clean boards or large leaves. Left in the sun to dry or placed near the gentle heat of a hearth, the mixture became a chewy sheet that kept for weeks. This portable treat provided a quick source of calories for long days in the fields and could be tucked into cloth packets for later use. The technique echoed African and indigenous methods of drying fruit to preserve it for travel and winter storage. After emancipation, many rural families continued to make persimmon leather as an autumn tradition, and some Appalachian homesteads still practice it today. Its deep caramel flavor and long shelf life show how ingenuity and patience created foods that were both practical and delicious. Wild persimmon leather stands as a vivid link between past and present, proving that simple preservation can yield enduring taste and nourishment. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were the kind of dinner that showed how families found sweetness even in struggle. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than sugar, was kept in jars that seemed to last forever, poured generously over hot biscuits fresh from the oven. My grandmother baked the biscuits with flour and lard, ingredients that could be stretched and shared across multiple meals. Once the biscuits were ready, she split them open, drizzled them with syrup, and served them with cold milk poured into glasses. It was simple but filling, providing enough energy for tired workers and growing children. The sweetness of the syrup turned plain flour biscuits into something that felt like a treat, even if it was just supper. In the 1960s, this kind of meal reminded families that comfort did not always need meat or elaborate dishes. It was about making do with what was on hand and finding joy in it. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were a reminder that sweetness could soften the edge of hardship. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house, and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Pig ear sandwiches were another example of how Black families wasted nothing and found flavor where others saw scraps. Pig ears, which butchers often sold cheaply, were boiled until tender, then sliced thin and placed between bread with mustard or hot sauce. The texture was chewy, but the taste was rich and savory, making them surprisingly satisfying. For many, these sandwiches became a dependable lunch or supper when more expensive meats were out of reach. They were especially common in rural towns where hogs were butchered at home and every part of the animal was used. Families knew that wasting nothing was not just thrifty, it was survival. Eating pig ears was also a mark of resilience, turning overlooked cuts into a food that people grew to enjoy. Today, pig ear sandwiches are remembered as a dish born from necessity but filled with pride, showing just how much strength could be found in the humblest of meals. Which of these 1970s dinners would you bring back? Drop your favorite in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to keep the flavor of history alive.